Thank you. Now we'll have the Honorable Senator Camillo Gonsalves.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, it is indeed humbling to stand in the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines this morning, and it is a tremendous honor to stand here as a senator and as a representative of the Unity Labour Party government and the tremendous track record that they have in the governance of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I stand here today on the shoulders of the excellent ULP senators who have come before me, and also on the shoulders of the excellent ministers who have served as ministers of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Commerce under the ULP administration. For those who have been doing all of this electoral speculating, it is instructive to note that the demands of the foreign minister are such that Minister Sir Louis Straker, Minister Douglas Slater and Minister Mike Brown are no longer in active politics. But it is also instructive that all three of them retired undefeated as politicians, thus refuting the maxim that all political careers end in defeat. Mr. Speaker, as I was preparing for this day, I read an essay by a German economist who is now credited as being one of the founders of sociology, Max Weber, called Politics as a Vocation. And in it he advances the proposition that politics is the art of compromise, that we may all have very high aspirations, but those aspirations are leavened by the cut and thrust of politics and the compromises that have to be made for us to get the business of governance done. And that is something that I agree with. But each and every one of us, somewhat unfortunately, is taught that lesson on day one of our entry into this Parliament, because we become compromised in being asked to swear an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, her heirs and successors. It is something that many of us have choked on, but it is a compromise that we have all had to undertake to have the honor and privilege of serving in this august body. But I note that it is not a constitutional requirement so to do, but a legal one. And since we are the body that makes the laws, hopefully in the very near future we can make an oath more fitting to our current context and our service of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Speaker, as we began our inexorable journey of independence, the last aspect of our governance that the colonial masters chose to grant us was the conduct of our foreign affairs. They gave us internal self-governance. We could mess up with self, but the last thing that they gave us was the right to exercise our sovereignty on the world stage and in the conduct of the foreign policy of nations. And that indicates, to my mind, the importance of the office of Minister of Foreign Affairs. And as important as foreign policy and foreign affairs were then, they are all the more so now, because we live in a much more globalized world. We have technology that brings us closer together. We have the rise of emerging economies that didn't exist when we gained our independence. And all of these things create new opportunities and new challenges for our national development, because our own context as people, as a developing nation, is linked to events in distant lands, and the strength of our friendships with our traditional and non-traditional allies is critical in our own advancement as a people, because many of the challenges that we face and bemoan today are not challenges that are of our own making. They are challenges that are externally imposed, like the global financial crisis and its regional offshoot in CLICO and BICO, like climate change, like guns and drugs that are trafficked through our region. All of these things have their genesis outside of our region, and foreign policy becomes even more critical in the governance of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we must strengthen our friendships, we must strengthen our alliances with both our traditional, non-traditional, and distant friends. The Bible, Sister Girl, in Honorable Member from Morocco, I apologize. The book of Proverbs says that we must honor our friends and our father's friends. And so too must we honor our friends in foreign policy and our traditional and historical friends. But it continues to say that in a time of crisis, there is no need to run to your brother's house. You should run to your neighbor's house. And in that regard, we have to make friends with our neighbors, both here in the Caribbean, in South and Latin America, because the distance physically between Kingstown and Caracas is shorter than the distance between Kingstown and Washington, D.C. And the distance between Brasilia and Kingstown is shorter than Kingstown to London. And the ideological space is even shorter. So we must make friends with all of the countries of the world, and particularly look out for our neighbors in the practice of foreign affairs. In regards to the other aspect of my ministerial portfolio, external trade and consumer affairs, I'd like to pledge here today, Mr. Speaker, that I want to work in an open and active manner with our business community on greater facilitation of trade, in identifying opportunities for foreign trade, and removing whatever bottlenecks may still exist legislatively. But on the other hand, we must also work with consumers on developing a body of law and of practice that has teeth and defends the rights of consumers in their day-to-day business. In IT, well, I shouldn't abbreviate IT, because the last time someone made a technological abbreviation here, they were embarrassed. In information technology, we have to recognize that it is not a panacea, but it is an indispensable and increasingly important component of our national development. We have a long way to go, because many of us think of IT as Facebook and laptops, but it is much more. And as our population becomes more and more technologically savvy, so too must our governance, and so too must the government ensure that technological access and opportunity is equal for all, from the richest to the poorest Vincentian, and we do not allow for the creation of classes of digital haves and have-nots in our emerging technological society. Regarding the information aspect of IT, I will also work very closely with the Honorable Minister of Information to create a more digitally accessible and communicative government. But I'll have other opportunities to discuss the various aspects of the ministry. I want to take up a point that the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown made, Mr. Speaker, about senators. And Senator, the Honourable Prime Minister can correct me because I never took Latin. But senator is a Latin word, and it derives, the Senate derives from a Latin word which means a body of wise old men. Only the Honourable Senator Francis qualifies by the original definition. But what it speaks to is that the body was created to deliver a more sober and thorough reflection on legislative processes than MPs, who have representational demands and political points to score that are far more immediate than those in the senatorial ranks. Unfortunately, senators have very often been indistinguishable from MPs on the parliamentary floor in both their style and the substance of their contribution. And that is unfortunate because it begs the question of why are we here, we the senators? Because if we do not add value to this discussion, if we do not add perspective, then we are superfluous and we are an unnecessary drain on the public purse. That deficit, seeing Mr. Parnell Campbell QC in the room, that deficit is one that the defeated constitutional amendment tried to address with what I believe was called the Council of Elders. But the failure of that constitutional amendment creates greater pressures on us within our existing system to live up to the original meaning and intent of the word senator. Now, we can't pretend that we are in a separate deliberative body. We can't pretend that we are aloof. We have to be sensitive to our own Caribbean context, the smallness of our parliament and the rest of it. But we cannot also view the senatorship as simply a political graveyard or a political launching pad where has-beens or wannabes go after this or that electoral event. It has to have value in and of itself, and we as senators have to give it that value to add to the deliberations of this parliament. Speaking of the original word of senator, a wise old man, it is unfortunate on both sides, Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, that we seem to have taken that to heart because there are so few women in the parliament as currently constituted. Less so today because the Honourable Senator Fredericks is not with us. I am sure that the Honourable Senator Fredericks would love to look across the aisle and see many more women on this side of the aisle. As would the Honourable Member for Marikwa, as would the Honourable Attorney General, as would I. When we look in the audience in the Strangers Gallery, we see that there is an almost even balance of men and women, but that is not reflected in the Parliament. And I would hate the young ladies who are here from school to think that the Parliament is not something to which they could aspire. And I hope that both of us also give some thought to that other constitutional provision that was defeated, to have at least a minimum number for representational purposes of women in the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I'm coming here from the United Nations, an experience that has made me by necessity a seeker of consensus and developed in me an ability to see the value of an opposing viewpoint. I have helped to broker deals between Americans and Iranians, found areas of agreement between Arabs and Israelis, and helped in some small way to build bridges between warring neighbors. With those experiences, Mr. Speaker, the differences in this room, while significant, seem unworthy of the malice and the rancor oftentimes displayed in this Parliament. If I may be permitted to quote and then abuse a statement made by Emperor Haile Selassie, the former Emperor of Ethiopia. He said, in the history of the human race, those periods which later appeared as great have been the periods when the men and women belonging to them had transcended the differences that divided them and recognized in their membership in the human race a common bond. Similarly, if historians are to look back at this era, we should recognize in ourselves that we are commonly all Vincentians, and we share dear, and I believe as Jomo believes, that we hold dear a belief that we can assist in the development of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I think that should be the unifying factor around which all of us can gather and govern. We may differ in our ideologies, our analyses, our prescriptions for national development, and these are important differences, and our electoral fortunes are premised on our ability to convince the electorate that we have the correct view. But I believe that despite these important differences, we are unified by a love for St. Vincent and the Grenadines and a genuine, sincere desire to see her do well. I want to tell the members of the opposition that whenever you find the occasion to rise above petty politics, you shall find in me a keen ear and an open mind. I am not interested in debates about furniture or whose throat should be metaphorically cut. But let us instead battle over our competing visions for the poor, the youth, education, our airport, our national growth and development. As we compete, let us do so with honor and dignity, not anger and sensationalism. Let iron sharpen iron, instead of us descending oftentimes into a state indistinguishable from a rum shop cacophony. Mr. Speaker, I know from witnessing the acclimatization of new parliamentarians in the past that the learning curve for all of us is going to be very steep. And I take on board very seriously the advice and well wishes that I've heard on both sides of this Honorable House. As one of the new kids on the block, I know that I shall make mistakes that are procedural, political, and substantive. And I apologize in advance for all of those mistakes and crave your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, and the indulgence of the fellow members as I find my way in this new environment. I appreciate very much the warm welcome that we've received from the opposite side of the House. Some of the metaphors escape me. I, unlike the Honourable Member for Central Kingstown, do not see the politics as a cherry to be bitten repeatedly. One bite at the cherry, two bites at the cherry, three bites at the cherry. I am in it to serve, not to eat cherries. But I think that the sentiment behind the metaphor was one with which I can agree. Similarly, Honourable Senator Lewis visited the Bible to tell us a lovely story about Abraham and Isaac and a sacrifice, father and son. But I think he ended it a little early, because as I recall, God provided a sacrifice. And the Father and the Son together sacrificed it and lived happily ever after. But to end, Mr. Speaker, I expressed some discomfort with the oath, the affirmation that we took this morning. I took it because it is required by the law. But I crave your indulgence this time on a Bible to swear an additional oath, one not compelled by the law, but by my heart and my conscience, to serve the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to uphold her laws and constitution to the best of my ability, without fear or favor. So help me Almighty God. I am obliged.